We had 18 months to develop a car.
Hello everyone and welcome to my educational platform. It is an honor this week to be welcoming Sarah Armstrong. Sarah is currently serving as the Chief People Officer within Rolls Royce PLC. She leads the global strategy for people and culture, and she's also responsible for the development of leadership and of talent within the organization. She has over 25 years of experience working across multiple industries to help define and deliver effective people and HR strategies with a very strong commercial focus. Prior to her CPO role, she was the HR director within the Civil Aerospace department in Rolls Royce, and her leadership was pivotal into helping the successful delivery of the largest restructuring program in Rolls Royce up until then. Now, what are you going to actually see in this interview? Sarah will take us through a journey of her major career challenges, the difficult decisions, and the qualities and good practices of a great people leader. We will dive into the logistical challenges of leading a global 550 member team within the aerospace industry, and how a young individual, a graduate, an apprentice, an intern, can, despite their lack of experience and lack of industry exposure, influence the perspective of a senior leader. Thank you, Sarah, for taking the time, for being so approachable and sharing your thoughts with a young generation. I hope you enjoy the interview.
You have to ask yourself that question of, how do I get the business back to a high performance level, and how do I therefore protect as many jobs as I can for the future, and actually how do I create an environment where there can hopefully be even more jobs in the future.
Would this be the best practice that somebody could use in areas when we have unforeseen circumstances? What I'm talking about, to be more specific, is the COVID pandemic we went through.
Yep.
So
Yep.
you were placed in a position where you had to effectively lead hybrid or remote teams.
Yes.
There's no access to people through these kind of unforeseen circumstances. Which was your most powerful weapon through that period?
I think acknowledging that we didn't know how to deal with what we faced during that period, and therefore you were going to make mistakes as you went.
What do you think is the best strategy to retain that kind of talent working across such a diverse portfolio?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the first thing you've got to do is step back and remind yourself what talent means in the environment you find yourself in. Sometimes I think talent can be used in a very small form, in as much as it's about, the best people in the organization or the people with the most potential.
Thank you, Sarah, for being here. You have over 25 years of HR experience in multiple industries, okay? You define and deliver effective people HR strategies. You've helped Rolls-Royce immensely in the past 2 decades. So I think there is a massive wealth of experience for young people to learn. And where I want to start is basically, you mentioned that you've always been fascinated by the human behavior. So it's going to be quite an open-ended question. It will revolve around the qualities which, in your opinion, synthesize a great HR leader. What would you say on that?
Yeah, you're right. So I think I've evolved my view that I've always been interested in human behavior, because as you and I discussed, it sort of started when I was at school and university, and getting a feel for why people make decisions the way they do, how that impacts the way we live and society. And I think all of that knowledge, as I went into the workplace, meant that I grew an interest in, well, what impact does it have on the decisions we make about the way we work, how decisions get made, how we impact on the value that businesses make as well. So translating that sort of curiosity around human behavior and what sort of drives us as individuals to do things different ways, and actually how that shows up in all different types of work, not just in leadership, but in all aspects of work, sort of translated into an interest into HR and leadership, because you can't do a leadership role in any functional area without having both. You have to have the technical HR, finance, whatever it is, expertise, as well as the leadership.
I believe what makes leaders shine is the adversity they go through and the decision making that goes through complete reorganization of firms or crisis for that matter. So you played a pivotal role in the civil aerospace within Rolls Royce.
Yep.
We're not going to go into too much detail, of course, because we can. But what about, I want to talk about the talent retention through those
Yeah.
periods of crisis, because there is a huge age demographic that you have to manage around in a global scale. So what do you think is the best strategy to retain that kind of talent working across such a diverse portfolio?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the first thing you've got to do is step back and remind yourself what talent means in the environment you find yourself in. Sometimes I think talent can be used in a very small form, in as much as it's about, the best people in the organization or the people with the most potential. And actually, it doesn't mean either of those two things. Talent is about making sure that you understand the skills and capabilities that you need for your organization for the future, and then asking the question backwards to say, well, how does that match with the skills and capabilities I have today, and how many of those skills and capabilities do I need? To then ask the question of, therefore, what are the areas that I really need to focus on from a retention of talent perspective? Because you also want a mix of skills, capabilities, demographics, and every aspect of diversity in order to make sure that you've then got that right mix of skills and capabilities. There's never a one answer or an easy answer to it as you start to think about what your talent retention strategies are. But they're the types of things that certainly when we were going through the civil restructuring, we asked ourselves, so, what types of skills also can we go back out to market and get if we need them when businesses pick up? So if you're going through a down period, you also have to ask yourself, what experience do I need to retain from a talent perspective, as well as core capabilities and skills? So it's quite a complex area to get your mind around. And I think the other thing is to use data. We forget the power of data in the organization. So that, understanding things from a data aspect and not just a human aspect, you have to bring those two things together. If you don't bring the two things together, then you're sort of going off somebody's opinion or view as opposed to a more data-driven answer.
Would this be the best practice that somebody could use in areas when we have unforeseen circumstances? What I'm talking about, to be more specific, is the COVID pandemic we went through.
Yeah.
So you were placed in a position where you had to effectively lead hybrid or remote teams.
Yes.
There's no access to people through this kind of unforeseen circumstances. Which was your most powerful weapon through that period?
I think acknowledging that we didn't know how to deal with what we faced during that period, and therefore you were going to make mistakes as you went. So being forced quickly into a hybrid way of working, having to make some really difficult decisions, including about people losing their jobs and therefore people's lives and families being impacted from a remote aspect, and then also having to think through, well, then how do you communicate that in a way that you would have done in the past and just said, get people into rooms, meetings, whatever. How can you make sure that you still treat people with care and with respect in a world that was just completely changing around us? And I think actually you can sit now and think that some of the hybrid ways of working and conversations like the ones we're having now completely virtually, you wouldn't have done that,
No.
as much, you just wouldn't have pre-pandemic. Whereas now we just do it naturally. So if you go back to that period, I think if you asked most of us when we started with the lockdown and having to think differently about it, if we weren't in that same crisis environment and situation, and you'd said to us, well, work out how remotely you can do X, Y, and Z, we'd have all gone, oh no, it's impossible. Put yourself in, right in the center of that type of crisis, and actually you find a way to do it. And it's only when you look back that you suddenly think, gosh, how on earth did we do that? So sometimes that retrospective look back actually teaches you more than what you're doing in the moment.
I think
That
it
makes
is a
sense.
it does, and I think it is a very important topic for discussion because how I had interpreted this in my mind is okay, senior leaders, okay, they learn from those kind of lessons, but they always have their sights in the future. So they
Yeah.
don't necessarily reflect or dwell, I would say, on the past so much. I don't believe it is the right term though. Maybe reflecting is better.
Mm.
Um, but you mentioned something about corporate responsibility against people who could be losing their jobs, which is
Yeah.
these are decisions that are not made lightly. I think everybody
No.
understands that. Everybody also feels the impact of that. How
Mm.
do you manage that balance? I think it's quite difficult to have to sign a paper or make a decision that says, well,
Yeah.
X amount of people have to lose their job to make this
Yeah.
organization sustainable
Yeah.
or investment worthy.
I think the first thing any senior leader has to do, not just HR, but because all senior leaders are involved in that decision making, you have to start with the fact that you are protecting something bigger than just making decisions around jobs. So you are normally looking at a business that's going through some form of change or crisis, or something that says your business is not performing, it's not delivering the value it should be. And if you carry on down that route, there will not be a business, and basically there will be no jobs. So you have to ask yourself that question of, how do I get the business back to a high performance level, and how do I therefore protect as many jobs as I can for the future, and actually how do I create an environment where there can hopefully be even more jobs in the future. So I think you've got to keep that mindset of, this is about getting through a period where normally you're not doing quite so well from a business performance perspective, and you wanting to create that bright future to bring jobs along with you. Then you can start to have to make the tougher decisions, which is, where are the areas of work? Because you have to think about work. You start with, what work do we need to stop doing, do less of, isn't driving value, that you then ultimately translate into jobs and roles. And they are the things that you then say, we need less of these types of jobs and roles because we can't afford them. Normally it's driven by cost and value in the organization. So you have to keep reminding yourself that it's about, you are going forward, you want to create that right future. It is about creating value, and you have to think about work and then translate it into jobs. And then ultimately, unfortunately, of course, it gets translated into human beings and individuals who lose their jobs. But it is about the job that you're losing. And then you've got to make sure that you think about how you will treat people through that process, both those people that ultimately leave and those that stay, because it's not an easy thing for either to go through. But you must keep in front of your mind, you are doing it for the right reasons, because you want to create that value. If you're not, then you're probably not making the right decisions.
Is it difficult to dress basically this kind of framework around people? Or how difficult, and I would rephrase it, how difficult is it to dress that kind of framework around people's emotions, I would say? I think people care within the
Yeah,
aerospace industry a lot about how they
yeah,
feel. Yeah, I mean, in general, people care about how they feel
they do.
in their daily job. How do you dress a framework around managing the expectations?
I think you're right. Any organization, but certainly in the aerospace industry, people tend to fall in love with the industry as well. So the
Yeah.
company and the industry, and have a real connection to the technology that we develop, and the impact that that has on the world, right? So again, when you're having to think about the difficult phases and how people will feel, you've also got to help with, where can you go out and find alternative redeployment opportunities. So one of the first things we would do in HR is go and work with other companies to say, has anybody got opportunities? We start to think about, how do you find routes through for other people to get jobs still within the industry, and to retain those skills in the industry, because obviously that's what we need going forward. So you've got to get yourself into that mindset quickly to help people, which is what's the redeployment, what retraining or skills opportunities have you got, and also potentially saying to people, well, actually, if you do go off into another industry for 2-3 years and things pick up here, then you'll be even better placed to come back to us in the future if we've got job opportunities. So I think helping people understand what their own individual career opportunities are is an important piece, which is difficult when you're impacting people with saying they haven't got a job, to then say, but don't worry, because we're going to help you develop your career. I mean, you're not always going to get a positive response to that, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. You still should be out there looking for those opportunities.
I think you're absolutely right. You can't satisfy everybody with implementing a strategy. What I also think is very crucial is that quote unquote forgiving statement you made. So you said, well, you can go somewhere else. You can go after what you believe is good for you. We are going to accept you back under maybe even better terms than the ones you entered in the organization. I think this is significant for especially young people to understand because
Yeah.
I think my generation, we tend to be a little bit job hoppers. We go from opportunity to opportunity. And in our mindset, we don't necessarily think that we're going to be accepted back under the same terms in the future. I think it stands for the organization you represent, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. Your generation in particular, that is more the norm. And
Yeah.
therefore, people of my generation who are in senior leadership roles actually need to make sure we challenge ourselves to say, that's okay, because you are developing different experiences, different skills and knowledges that you can then bring back into the organization. And actually, even if you don't, that's okay as well, because if you're staying within the industry or out in commercial industry, then you're just adding value to the economy. So I think it's got to be, you've got to have, my own personal ethos I encourage other leaders to have is you've got to encourage people to develop their own potential in the way that's right for them. And if ultimately that means somebody comes back to the organization that you happen to work for, so for me, Rolls Royce, then that's a win. But if they're out there just being the best they can be, then that is also a win.
And I think they're going to have significant impact within the organization. At least it is something that I am after. And I believe if it becomes personal enough to people, if they think, okay, I'm in this organization, it is not a cold corporate world. These people
Yeah.
do actually care about me. I think we can display this through this interview as well. These people care about me. So I will make my job a personal matter and I will do the best I can to drive for my position. And I think you would like that. Would you like people to, let's say, micro lead themselves? So you lead from top down. How about people leading from bottom up? Is that desired, in your opinion?
Yeah. I think for all of us, and wherever you are in your career, so I think about it less bottom up, but wherever you are in your career, I always think that you will feel more at ease with your own decisions if they are your own decisions. And sometimes, you want something, and for whatever reason you don't get it, you go for that career promotion, you don't get it, you want to keep your job and you don't get the opportunity to. But the more you can be in control of, but I will go and find something else, develop another skill, look for opportunities to do that. If we can keep that positive mindset, then I think you can see opportunities more clearly. And again, I know that's really difficult when you're really facing uncertainty and people have got, families that they support and other commitments. But I think if we can care enough to, again, support people and help them with what their options might be, then hopefully we are all in that situation where career opportunities become more visible to us, just because we're taking our own personal accountability to go out and look for them and find them, because ultimately everybody's career is their own. It's not owned by a corporation, it is your own career. And I know it doesn't always feel like that to people, but I think it is very much driven by your own sort of ambition and emotion and desire. And that's good. That's a good thing.
And I believe that is where it becomes difficult to measure. So, which would be your best practices of actually understanding how people do feel like within an organization, especially within aerospace, which I think is a little bit different than your previous experience, which was in Marconi before coming to Rolls Royce. Have you seen any differences in measuring what people, how people feel like?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the point that we just talked about, which is people fall in love with an industry, right? Quite often, not just I want to be an engineer. I don't care which industry I'm in, for instance. So I think taking the time to listen to an organization, there are lots of different ways that you get a sense of how people are feeling. You know, you've got the more traditional engagement surveys, but then you've got, you know, focus groups that people are running, or just doing some informal listening sessions, or just being open to reverse mentoring, or just talking to somebody that says, we've never met, but I've got a point of view, would you listen? You know, the more leaders are willing to go out and listen to different voices, the better, I think, because you can sit in your ivory tower and get very disconnected from how the organization feels. It's very easy to do. So you have to remind yourself as a leader sometimes, actually, I haven't got out to the factory or spoken to people in their early career or whatever population it is. Go out and listen to voices, ask them questions.
I think it is a
Don't talk
testament.
at people and present. Go out and listen. I think that's the key thing. Just go out and have a conversation and listen.
I think it is a testament to your leadership style that you are willing to put yourself out there, humble yourself enough to the point where you want to hear
Yeah.
what a graduate or an early talent member has to
Yeah.
say. How do you believe it helps you? What do you believe, let's say, that quote unquote you lack that you can find? Because I know what I'm lacking, and that's experience. That's what I'm
Yeah.
seeking from you as a person.
Yeah.
What do you seek?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is, when you get to be a senior leader, you typically, to your point, you've built yourself a certain level of experience, but you are also typically at a certain point in your life and career, which means that, for instance, a graduate coming in or an apprentice or somebody who's in sort of mid-career, they're going to have a completely different concept of how they want it to feel in the world of work, and also how they want to feel supported by the company, and also just what makes them feel that leaders around them care. And if you don't go and ask the question, then you won't know. You could get very outdated on your view of, well, this is how I was successful, or the other senior leaders around me. And society in the world of work changes constantly. So, the career path that I followed is not the career path that the next generation of chief people officers are going to have followed. It's going to be a different one because the world of work has changed. So I do think it is just going out and taking the time to fill your own knowledge gap. It's not about experience. It's making sure that you understand the perspectives of others. And again, it's hard, right? You don't have enough time as a senior leader to go out and do that all the time, but finding the time to do it enough, or at least also encouraging others in your team to do it, so that between you've got that sense, is important, I think.
I think it is crucial, and of course, it's understandable. You cannot be available to everybody. But there is lessons to be learned that people they can absolutely apply. So let's say, for instance, that we have a person who just entered the organization, or any organization for that matter. How would you advise them? What kind of behavior they have to display to start leading change from their position in their small team? It can be like 3, 4 people. What can they do as a young person? Sometimes we feel like we can do nothing. I'm a young person. I don't know anything. I will follow.
Yeah. I think the first thing is, if don't think that you haven't got knowledge and information that isn't going to be powerful to others, or that isn't going to help and guide others. Also think about yourself around how you are showing up from a point of view of what skills and experience are you bringing, how are you thinking about what success would look like for the team that you're in, but also starting to get a bit of a feel for where's the bigger success of the organization. And then some of it is about, I think, having a bit of courage around speaking up if you see something that you think, actually, I think there's a better way to do it, a different way to do it. Because sometimes you can know it and you can think it in your head, but you can also think, oh, but nobody's going to listen to me, or, well, I don't know enough to actually know whether I think that's right or not. So finding a way sometimes to say, I've been thinking about, or, I've got some input to, it's can feel like quite a difficult thing to do when you're sort of at that early stage of your career. But I think if you can find a way to do it, and if you're in an organization that is encouraging you to do it, which would be great, or a team, then just find that voice, find a way to influence the shape of the work that you're doing. I think it does make a big difference. And actually, if you get a chance to go to a listening session with senior leaders, etc., then actually we are interested in hearing your perspective. I know when I was earlier in my career, I used to think, oh my goodness, those senior executives, they know everything. How on earth do they know everything? Trust me, we don't know everything. And actually, people in the organization doing the day-to-day work know a lot more about their jobs than we'll ever know, and therefore information that you could tell us about how things should be done differently is really, really important. So I think, not being scared sometimes, and I know it's difficult, but finding that voice sometimes can be really powerful.
I believe that when you're able to sit there where you belong as a senior leader, but then get down there and listen to everybody, this kind of perspicacity allows you to stay at the edge, especially when you are facing disruptive change. My last question would be about your voice. How do you raise your voice, especially within an organization that goes through, let's say, a transformative stage? Where do you focus to make sure that you stay on track and all the gaps are filled the way they should?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very tricky question to answer. I think first thing I would say is I would never sit here and say I have perfectly found my voice, or that I have influence over everything I would like to have influence over. So I think the first thing is you've got to understand what you stand for as a leader, and therefore where you want your voice to be heard. So whatever role you're in, whatever organization or team or function or whatever you're leading, something about that's got, if you're leading that team, there's got to be something about you that comes out in how you shape that. So for instance, for me, I talk a lot about I want us to change the way it feels to work at Rolls Royce. I want people to feel better about when they turn up to work, how it feels. And that's multifaceted from an employee experience perspective. But I push my team, and I want other HR people and other employees in Rolls Royce to then start to think, yeah, how if it was great beyond how it already is great, then how would that feel, and how do we translate that into things that would make a difference? But I think, so as a leader, I think you've just got to have that little bit of self-belief and identity, and then pick an area that you really want to make a difference with, because you can't have a voice on everything.
As I said, it is a wealth of knowledge. Sarah, it was it's very insightful to me. I can say that I'm at a point where I feel glad that I'm working for an organization with people who are leading in the capacity that you are. I think it's going to be very insightful to the people who are going to see this.
Thank you. Nice to talk with you.
Nice talking to you as well. Have a beautiful afternoon.